Today's debate is fiery, to say the least.
For those of you that have had your heads buried deep into the sand, Diary of a CEO, which I think is like the #1 podcast in the country, has just done its first debate. It's an emergency debate, and I wouldn't normally watch these things, but there was a huge bit of it that went into tax.
Taxes!
But there were some bits in it that were super interesting, and I thought we'd use this as an opportunity to watch back some of those important clips, dive into it, do a bit of analysis, a bit of commentary, and give you my professional take. So this is the background. So this is a debate between Gary Stevenson and Daniel Priestley. I will be honest, I have not come across Daniel Priestley before. Gary I've come across, and I know a little bit about his politics. I'm not going to get into the politics today, but what I thought was fascinating within a very short period of time is they start getting into a bit of debate about wealth creation, wealth inequality, and they talk specifically, and this is what's relevant to me, around fiscal policy. And Gary in particular makes a very, very impassioned set of arguments that ultimately the tax system is designed to help the rich to pay little to no tax. And from my perspective, that's not really true. I deal with private individuals, I deal with high net worth individuals on a daily basis, and I'm not getting into trickle-down economics here, but just purely on the basis of what I know they contribute to UK PLC, it's substantial. We're just trying to break down what is right from what is wrong, get rid of the rhetoric, and just focus on what is. I hope you enjoy.
And it was 50% top rate of tax. 50% top rate of tax, plus national insurance, 60%.
So $1 million a year.
To bring my family out of poverty. At the same time, the Duke of Westminster inherited £10 billion and paid nothing. Do you think that's fair?
That's not true.
Okay, why is it not true?
Because the Duke of Westminster is one of the highest taxpayers in the country.
What does he pay?
Well, on the trust, the Grosvenor estate, they don't pay inheritance tax because trusts can't die. They pay something called periodic taxes,
Which is how much?
6% every
How
10
often?
years.
6%, so they pay 0.6% a year.
Six-
So I paid
just hold
60%
up.
and this guy pays 0.6%.
Apples.
What's happening here is that Gary is making this kind of like-for-like comparison, which is not in any way like-for-like. You cannot compare income tax to inheritance tax. And what he's doing is he's sort of obfuscating from the key points and saying, well, 0.6% compared to what he claims is 60%. It sounds like working people are paying, in some cases, or very wealthy working people like Gary, who exploit the stock market, 100 times more than what a very wealthy person is paying. But that's not the truth, because trusts or trustees of trusts are still paying income on the income that is generated from the assets in a trust. If they dispose of assets, they're going to be paying capital gains tax. So it's a bit of a misconception, or even quite dangerously a misrepresentation, to say that trusts only pay 0.6% a year, and that is it.
Apples with apples. Inheritance tax is 40% across the course of your life. If a trust is
Thank you, Daniel. He says it.
70 years, then 6% times 7 would be 42. So they actually pay more.
So he pays 0.6% a year.
Pro
You're telling me 0.6%
But that would
a
be
year.
the same as...
What percent did I pay per year?
No. But that's...
60%.
Hold up.
So you're saying I pay, what's 60 over 0.6?
No.
100.
So you can see Gary's going off on a bit of a tangent here, but the key point, which I'll just demonstrate very briefly, which Daniel does a relatively good job of explaining, is that a trust can't die in the way that a human being dies. And people have got lots of different reasons why they might put a trust in place, whether it's succession planning or asset protection. There are lots of different reasons. But the 6% charge, if you look at it over a generation, it's sort of intended from a policy perspective to equate with what would ultimately be a 40% tax, notwithstanding that there are certain reliefs and thresholds, but a 40% tax on assets that someone has as at the date of their death. So it's intended to be an equating measure or an equalization measure. It's not intended to be more tax efficient. So I think there are lots of misunderstandings here, and there seems to be a willing, in my view, attempt to equate inheritance tax with other taxes to make it appear as if the wealthy are simply paying almost no tax compared to the average worker.
Times the tax rate.
You're not comparing apples with apples.
Wait, why is it not apples with apples? This
Because-
guy pays 0.6% a year. I paid 60% a year.
That's inheritance
I
tax.
paid that 60%
You're
every
talking
year, Daniel.
income
Every
tax.
year I paid
You're
it.
paying income.
Well, I don't know if he was paying 60% a year, but the point is that if we're talking about a complex trust which has got companies, the companies are going to be paying corporation tax. They're almost certainly UK companies. They might be paying out dividends, so the trustees are going to be paying income tax. There are lots of different things that might be taking place in the framework, in the structure of this trust, that are going to be incurring taxes in all different directions. And the revenue is not getting taxes as a result of this. It's a complete misrepresentation of the way a trust really works.
anybody else.
So you think he pays income tax on the income on that?
Any income he draws.
Okay, well, our
would
viewers
pay
can
tax.
research whether he pays income tax on his income.
This idea that income tax is just not being paid because somehow a trust just makes it disappear, it is a total misconception. Look, I'm sure what it does is it's a reflection of an ongoing ignorance and a lack of understanding of how trusts really work. But trusts have, at least from a UK perspective, not been particularly efficient structures from a tax perspective for a very long time. As I said earlier, of course, there are lots of different reasons why you put in place a trust from a succession planning perspective. But the idea that somehow you put everything in a trust and, abracadabra, it all disappears, it just deals with all of your tax problems, is really either willful ignorance or willful misrepresentation.
But why is it that the Duke of Westminster can be worth £10 billion?
You're comparing your income
Yeah.
versus the amount he inherited, which is not a fair thing. That's not
Because
income.
that's his income.
Inheritance is not income.
So wait. So if I get given £10 billion, I don't pay any tax. But if I work for £10 billion, I pay 60%.
If you inherit
If this is the tax system that you want, you will end up in a system
I'm just
where
saying-
the kids of the rich will own everything.
I'm just saying
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. And that's fine because that's our kids.
You're not telling
That's
the
you know
truth
what?
about his
Let's support it.
situation.
Let's have a tax system.
I think it's really important to say at this point that no one is saying that the tax system is entirely fair, but I think this discussion is just a little bit too black and white. And yes, looking at ways to more fairly distribute wealth, or more fairly implement potential tax changes, that is a conversation that all of us in this country should be willing to have, whether we're professionals or we are simply, paying tax into the system. But this idea that the wealthy simply do not pay tax or do not want to pay tax, I think is a total misunderstanding. And I can say that from real world sort of anecdotes and real world stories that I see from the clients that we act for at our firm.
I'm going to basically say to that young entrepreneur, don't build your business in Britain. Go start it somewhere that they're more proactive and positive towards entrepreneurs.
Are we seeing that now with this, they call it the millionaire exodus, which is, for people that don't know, the UK is set to lose the greatest proportion of millionaires in the world this parliament. I'll put a graph on the screen, which is this one here, and that little red line here is...
This was really sobering. I mean, I didn't see this chart. I saw another one that was put together by another organisation, and I think it showed that in calendar year 2024, there would be an exodus of 9,000 millionaires. And I think what's uber sobering about this whole situation is that everyone expected there to be this exodus of non-DOMs, which I'll come back to in a second. But from my own day-to-day experience, it's not been non-DOMs, it's been non-DOMs and UK DOMs. And this is about so much more than tax. Perhaps tax is the thing that triggers the wave in the first case, but then people look around them and they see, well, hold on, some of the people I'm transacting with or the companies I'm transacting with, they don't see the UK as a business environment anymore, as a place that is open to business and innovation, because I simply can't grow because of the levels of tax. And there isn't that aspiration. And to be honest, you can see with these figures, I mean, the 20% that's leaving, they are going somewhere else. And you can see all these other jurisdictions around the world clearly taking in a lot of those millionaires. And I mean, on a day-to-day basis, I connect with people from Switzerland, from Monaco, from Italy, who are literally doing tours around London to try and pick up some of these people that are looking to leave. So this is a serious problem. Whether we want to get into trickle-down economics or not, the point is these people buy things, they sell things, they do have businesses and they do employ people, and the knock-on effect could be quite substantial. On the topic of non-DOMs, I thought what was very interesting was actually under the last Conservative government, sort of in those dying months, they projected that there was going to be an exodus, and don't quote me on this, we'll do a bit of fact checking, of about 77 non-DOMs in tax year 25-26, which is just about to come. In those first few months after that was announced, which is before Labour even came in, I probably spoke to around 30 families. So we're talking a very large proportion of that so-called 76, 77 number, and it goes without saying that I don't act for that big a proportion of non-DOMs. So it's a sobering realization that the UK, I mean, it is a great country, but ultimately the elasticity and the attraction, it's got a tipping point, and we may have reached that.
Why are all these millionaires running away?
Well, it's not because they're taxing their wealth, because we don't have any wealth taxes.
Why do you think they're leaving?
So firstly, when Gary's talking about a wealth tax, what he's talking about is a tax on unrealized gains, which is a really tricky thing because firstly, from a valuation perspective, if I've got a company that I've started and someone comes along and says, I think I'd like to have 10% of that company and I value that 10% shareholding at £1 million, suddenly my entire wealth is valued, well, the other 90% at £9 million, right? What I've created is worth 10 million. So if I'm not actually making money from that and that's just someone's valuation, and suddenly what, I'm going to be taxed on that even though I haven't sold it, I don't have any cash necessarily from that business, I've just created an idea. So whose valuation are we actually relying on and how am I supposed to find the cash? And if that's going to happen and I've got an opportunity to go somewhere else, am I not going to go somewhere else so I can build this business and actually realize the creation that I'm trying to bring into the world?
I think the reason they're leaving is because the UK economy is really, really weak. Because the UK consumer is really, really weak. Because we've absolutely crushed the spending power of your average British family.
And where are they
your average
going?
British family can barely afford to feed the kids and turn the heating on. So why are you going to start a business here when the customers are absolutely impoverished?
Look, it corresponds with a new tax that we brought in, which was we ended the non-dom scheme. So the non-dom scheme basically said if you're living in the UK, but you've got businesses all over the world, then we only tax you on what you've got in the UK. And if you die in the UK, we'll only tax you on your UK assets for inheritance tax if you're a non-dom. But if you die in the UK and you've got wealth in India, once that non-dom scheme ended, they basically said, we will tax you on everything globally. If you're if you're a tax resident in the UK, everything you've got globally, we want 40% of it.
Everyone talks about non-doms, it's in the news all the time, but effectively a non-dom is an individual, I'm speaking very broadly here, whose permanent home is outside of the UK. And broadly speaking, the rules up until a couple of weeks' time is that those individuals can be resident in the UK for 15 out of the previous 20 tax years. And before they've hit that 15 out of 20 year period, they don't pay tax on their overseas income and gains unless they bring the income and gains to the UK. And they're not exposed to inheritance tax on their worldwide assets. This is being changed from the 6th of April 2025. So broadly speaking, people that have done this kind of long-term residence in the UK will not be eligible under this new regime. It's called the Foreign Income and Gains Regime, shortened to FIG, which makes it sound really sweet and juicy, but it's not sweet and juicy for that many people. But for those individuals that have not been tax resident in the previous 10 tax years, they can come to the UK and for a 4-year period, they don't pay tax on what they produce outside the UK, and most importantly, they can bring it into the UK.
So unfortunately, every wealth manager contacted their clients and said, you can't stay here. You're going to have to get out. It's gotten really bad. 1,000 people a month are leaving. And in the UK, 1% of people pay 30% of the taxes, 10% of people pay 60% of the taxes. And you imagine if we're sitting out at dinner and there's 10 of us out for dinner and one person says, hey, I've got this, I'll get 60% of the bill tonight. We say to them, no, it should be 70%, it should be 80%. And they say, you know what, I'll get up and leave. So they leave, everyone else's bill just doubled. So what's going to happen is if we drive the millionaires out of this country, every ordinary normal person who pays 10 grand a year in tax will now have to pay 20 grand a year in tax.
So the reason they left is because we used to allow them to not pay tax. And now we ask.
No.
Global, yeah, taxes matter, right? So why is everyone going to Dubai? Dubai, they're going there because there's no tax.
These guys, they live in Dubai, their money comes from the West. They are making money from the West while your average Western ordinary person watching this show now cannot afford to buy a house, cannot afford to have a family. We can tax those revenues at the point of sale. Why do we allow these guys?
It's called a consumption tax.
No, it's not. It's a tax on profits. It's not a tax on consumption.
You just said if you tax profits,
yeah,
right, then those profits have to accumulate in that country. And because of the digital ecosystem that we now have, the world we now live in, I can lease the database off of my company in Luxembourg.
Listen, these guys are not Gandalf. You just say, we don't accept profit shifting. We don't need to accept profit shifting. China does not accept profit shifting. We did not accept profit shifting 50 years ago. We do not have to accept profit shifting.
I guess this is one area where I'm not going to disagree with Gary Stevenson. I don't get involved in corporate tax or anything like that, but I think as a general rule, we need to try and find a way to harmonise tax as much as we possibly can, and we probably could do that a bit better at the corporate level to make sure that legitimate taxes are being raised in jurisdictions where companies are mostly operating. On this, I think he's not wrong, and absolutely efforts have been made over recent years to try and get rid of this problem.
My friend sold his company in the UK. It's a company everybody knows. And I remember him saying to me at the time, it was in the middle of the pandemic, he'd got this big exit event. I think he'd made 300 million. And he goes, I'm off. I go, where are you going? He goes, I'm going to go to Dubai and Monaco and live between the two. And I said to him, explain to me why. He goes, well, the amount of tax I'd have to pay in the UK is equivalent to me paying 20 million rent in the UK for the next 6 or 7 years, which he'd have to stay here for. So he went and he pops back in every now and then, but it meant that he could keep that 150 million whatever tax he would pay. And he went on to say, the UK product, it just isn't worth it. He goes, crime, I'm going to get my Rolex robbed off me. He goes, the healthcare system isn't the best.
I think this is, again, another interesting point that comes up, and it sort of backs some of the comments that I've heard from clients about leaving the UK. It's not just about the tax environment, but it's a sense of, I'm putting in, what am I getting out? Not selfishly, not like it's got to be equal, but when I look at lifestyle, and when I look at security, and when I look at opportunity in a business sense for my children, I want the best possible options. And there's just a sense that there's been a shift in the UK recently. This was from my perspective at least, it was a really enjoyable listen or watch. I don't know what your medium was, but it was really frustrating. It was really infuriating at times, because if you're going to have a conversation around tax, which is a really serious subject, and I'm not saying that it's all perfect. When I think about my tax books sitting in the other room, they just get bigger and bigger and bigger every single year, and seemingly more and more complicated. But I think that's because the world is getting more complicated. The way we transact, the way we do business, the way we interact even personally, it's just getting more complicated. So I just think that when we're having these sort of debates, we need to make sure that both the people who are participating and those that are listening are as well informed as they possibly can be. And that's where I think this fell short. Not in entertainment factor, but in terms of actual knowledge and expertise on the subject matter. I think Daniel did an excellent job. He's not a tax expert, by the way, but clearly he's got a fantastic ability to put these points across, and he's thought about it, and he's got his own perspectives. Gary's approach, his rhetoric and his debating style, it's frustrating. He jumps in all the time, doesn't let people finish their points, and he makes a lot of sort of soundbitey, clickbaity comments that are obviously intended to be sort of standouts on YouTube with big capital letters. Oh, this person pays no tax. We don't live in this binary world. Things are not black and white. Our world is more complex than ever, and our taxes are more complex than ever. Not on purpose, I just think that's how it's evolved organically. It's no criticism, I'm sure they've done it from a good place, but I think this debate needs to happen with people who deal with taxes on a day-to-day basis, or at least people that think about taxes on a day-to-day basis. Which I do. Yes, many people feel sorry for me on that front. But if Stephen Bartlett wants to have a further discussion on this, I'm obviously available. Or anyone else out there that wants to have a discussion, or if you just want to leave a comment on some of my comments or on the main video, please do. It's a really interesting conversation, and we intend to do more videos like this. So please just engage. It's a conversation that can never stop.